Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this exciting series of conversations with some of our most inspiring women at Imperial. I want to start by thanking Pinky Lilani and Marty Wickstrom for their support and help creating this series and for connecting us to their wonderful network of friends. Welcome to all of you. Imperial College London is indeed one of the world's greatest universities, focusing on science, engineering, medicine, and business. We have some 20,000 students and 8,000 staff pursuing the forefront of their fields. I'm excited to say that our research discoveries are ever more present in the news, and in our teaching, we learn new things every day from the youngest members of our community. Thus, in this series, we decided to connect some of our breathtaking career moments with the ideas and aspirations of our younger colleagues and students. Tonight, in our session called Talking About Science, How We Can All Benefit, we'll begin with fascinating science, and we'll discuss how we can engage a broader community in what we do. We're really looking forward to your questions, and I hope you'll use the Q&A function to send us your questions. Let me begin by introducing our luminaries. Professor Maggie Dallman, OBE, is our professor of immunology and our vice president of international and associate provost of academic partnerships. She wears many hats: researcher, educator, and our academic lead on both our international relations and our societal engagement strategies. Maggie's research is very timely as the whole world has turned its attention to immunology. She focuses on overvigorous or inappropriate immune responses, which can lead to debilitating life-threatening conditions such as autoimmune responses, as well as rejection of transplants. Maggie cares deeply about public engagement and dialogue about science, and is passionate about giving young people from all walks of life the opportunity to reach their potential. She believes that education is central in achieving this goal. In recent years, this has become an increasingly important part of her contribution, and we will talk about her tireless efforts to make a difference to people. Her passion for research, teaching, and public engagement is infectious. Priya Pallan is equally passionate about public engagement. She is responsible for building and maintaining strong relationships with local residents and community organizations around the White City campus. She has helped develop and implement a wide-ranging and exciting program with the community and is growing our network of impact every week. She came to this role from Brunel University London, where she was the engagement manager in the Vice Chancellor's office. Priya studied law and international relations and served both as president and vice president of the Students' Union. She has recently completed a secondment with the Hammersmith and Fulham Council as Strategic Community Engagement Advisor to share the college's learnings and experiences of developing its community engagement practice in White City. I was proud to present her with the 2020 President's Leadership Award for Excellence in Societal Engagement. So we want to have a conversation, and we will see how these impressive women have come to be the scientists and scholars and community engagers they are today, and where they are heading. So please gather your questions along the way. So let me start with you, Maggie. You've been doing fundamental science, the study of immunology, and you use those adorable, important little fish called zebrafish. Would you share with us one of your discoveries, one of the aha moments from your science, and how that led to your second aha moment about public engagement?
Thank you, Alice, and thank you all the audience for turning up tonight when you could actually be in the pub or having your hair cut. It's great to have you here. So I first really encountered the complexities of the immune system during my undergraduate years at Bristol University. And really at that time, our knowledge of immunology was based on observed phenomena, and there was very little understanding of the cells or the proteins and molecules that were involved in generating an immune response. I was lucky to carry out my final year project in the Medical Research Council Human Immunology Unit. And it was here that I first experienced the real, true excitement of finding out something that nobody else knew. And for me, at least, which had the potential to be of practical benefit. I mean, it's a bit corny, I know, but that was my first aha moment. And I was really hooked. And as we know, and Alice has alluded to, the ability to generate an immune response is absolutely vital to our survival. And boy, that has been brought into sharp focus over the last year. But it's also known that an unregulated or dysregulated immune response can directly cause disease. And it was this aspect of immunity that I became particularly interested in. And I want to share just a few slides with you. So this is the moment where you're not sure if it's going to work or not. But here we go. Let's try it. Can we all see? Yes, hooray, good. So I'm just going to show you a few examples of where the immune system is really destroying the body. And up here in the top left corner, you can see the hands of a patient with rheumatoid arthritis. That is an autoimmune disease where the immune system is directly destroying the tissue of the body. And this is actually a brain scan of a patient with multiple sclerosis, and you can see plaques in the brain. This I thought was kind of appropriate for the moment where we were all going out to start drinking beer again. But the point to make is that obese tissue is actually massively infiltrated with immune cells, as are plaques in blood vessels, in cardiovascular disease, and indeed in the brain of patients with diseases like Alzheimer's. And in these situations, not quite clear what the role of the immune system is, but it's known that the presence of these cells is actually damaging. And here, this is a picture of the 1918 flu pandemic in which over 50 million people died. And that is just what's happening, you know, at the moment. In these flu patients, their lungs become very, very heavily infiltrated with immune cells, and they lose the ability to do the gaseous exchange you need in the lungs. And that's actually why a lot of the patients die. It's not to do with the virus infection, it's due to the fact that their lungs are just really clogged up. So after Bristol, I did my DPhil in Oxford, and I had a postdoc in Stanford in the US, which was great. And then I went back to Oxford, where I spent 10 great years in the Nuffield Department of Surgery, working on the immune mechanisms of organ graft rejection. And by this time, of course, it was very clear that effective and controlled immunity involves many, many different cell types. And you can't really mimic this in a simple cell culture system, for instance. So I've worked on a variety of organisms, ranging from human to rat to mouse, and most recently to the adorable zebrafish. And I can't resist showing some of this to you, some of these adorable organisms to you, and the power actually of what they can tell us. So now, how do I move to the next slide? Here we go. So I'm going to turn this video on, and the noise that you can hear in the background is just the water being pumped around in our aquarium. And you can see the lovely little fish, which are 1.5 inches so long, swimming around there. This picture here, the fish here, which is silvery and stripy, that's a normal fish. But the community has generated fish which are actually transparent, which means we can look directly into the fish at what's happening to them. This is an aquarium, so each of these are tanks that contain different lines of fish. And actually, we do a lot of our experiments on fish that are about 5 days old only. And this is an example of a fish that's about 5 days old. And to show you how big it is, this little bar here sits against a €1 coin, because we are European, so we measure everything in euros. You might be able to see little green dots here moving around in the fish, and those are immune cells actually that have been labeled with a protein that allows us to see them. And this is just one experiment I want to show you, but it tells you so much. So this is a little fish again here. And actually we're about to cut the tip of the tail off this little fish. And that sounds a bit cruel, but it's not. And we do it under anesthesia and so on. And the remarkable thing actually is that the fish will grow that tail back within a few days. But what happens immediately following the cut is shown in this slide here. So this is the tail here. This line, dotted line, represents where we've cut it. And up here, this end is the head end. And if I start the video, I want you to look at the two different colors of cells, because these are tagged to do two different types of immune cells. They're called neutrophils and macrophages. Doesn't really matter, but just watch at the different behavior in those two populations. So, up here at the top, there's a green one, made it to the finishing line. Oh, and there's more here. And actually you can see cells beginning to migrate from quite a long distance away towards this cut. And the red cells are kind of dithering around a bit, actually, not doing anything very useful looking. But eventually, actually, they start to move to the site of injury. Here you can see this one getting on a pace to arrive at the site of injury. And just that simple video tells you so much about the behavior of these different types of immune cells in response to injury. Now, as Priya knows, I could talk for hours on this, but I won't. I'll come back and stop sharing my screen to talk a little bit more about the other aspect of the work that I want to share with you today. But I'm very proud of the work that we've done in defining more accurately, really, the cellular and molecular mechanisms involved in immunity. But as Alice said, at the same time, I've become more and more interested in sharing the amazing science that I'd gotten into and encouraging, really, in particular, younger children to develop or keep up their interest in science. And it was during my time in Oxford that I had my second aha moment. And it was at an open day that we held for transplant patients and their families. And in chatting to them, the patients in particular, I found that what I thought was really going to be important to them was not what they thought was the most important to them. And it was kind of a sobering moment, because it meant I was sort of barking up the wrong tree, but one which really illustrated to me so firmly the need for partnership working with important stakeholders of our research. And it really reinforced for me that in communicating, it's all about dialogue and conversation that really counts. We should not ever be in our ivory tower, and that actually doing science effectively requires many skills that are important for all sorts of life experiences. And I think, the opportunities that I've had have enabled me to have a wonderfully rich and interesting career and a good life. And this has all come together for me through the work that Alice spoke about, that I currently oversee, in particular at White City. And I'm immensely proud of that. And it means for me giving opportunities like I had, primarily to young people, but also for older generations. So they get a bit of the excitement that I get out of science, but also the real practical value in understanding science. And also, to come back to that point, it's about listening to your partners and working with your partners, not doing things to your partners. And that is such an important message for everybody, I think, to take on board. Much of the work that we do at White City is entirely dependent on the generosity of friends of alumni who share our passion. And some of them I know are in the audience today. So thank you. And finally, I'd like to say that none of the work or the activities that we do and we'll be talking about today would have been possible without amazing colleagues like Priya, who you're just about to hear from, but also the many staff and many students from Imperial that get involved in this activity. So thank you all as well. Thanks, Alice.
Well, thank you, Maggie. That's very inspiring, and you inspire that entire team and the whole community. And I know that Priya is very inspired by this. And Priya, you didn't train as a scientist, you trained in law, but you've absolutely helped us define and develop a new role for Imperial, the community engagement manager, since you arrived with us in 2016. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about your aha moment and the way your career developed and what led you to this.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Yeah, that's right. It feels like a long time ago, but I did start off studying law, and at the time, fully intended to be this awesome hotshot lawyer, but obviously ended up doing something very different, and taking a different path, which actually I'm very, very grateful for, because my job doesn't feel like a job, which I know not everyone can say that they feel that way, and it's so close to the person and my values and purpose, and it's helping me realize the impact that I want to have in this life. So I'm very grateful that I didn't continue down that pathway. So I guess for me, the shift really started when I was at university. So I know I'm speaking to two academics, right? But it wasn't the academic side of things that shifted me. It was more the experience of being at university. So for the first time, I met people from all walks of life, from different backgrounds, hearing different people's thoughts and opinions, having conversations about issues that affected us at young people. And through that, I started to get more and more involved in the student movement. And I pretty much went in like a very clueless undergraduate and left like president of the student union, and that is because of the people that I met. And it was as president, I think, when I look back, that's when the community engagement kind of practitioner seeds were first planted, because I got involved in activities which were exploring how we could better build relationships with local residents and students on the campus that we're based at. I have to say, my grandma still tells everyone I'm a lawyer, so I still have to deal with that at family gatherings. But in terms of I think I've had quite a few aha moments over the past 10 years. But I think one of them that has really struck me, and I think has created this thought shift for me as a person and who I am, it's actually to do with Maggie. So on my interview, when I got the interview for Imperial, obviously I was blown away by this job. Like, this was my dream job. So worked really, really hard on my application, but also spent a lot of time thinking about like my fear of how I needed to be accepted at Imperial. So I wasted a lot of mental energy. And I remember I cringed thinking about it, rocking up to my interview. Like, I borrowed a very expensive Mulberry bag of a friend. I tied my hair up in a bun. I put on a skirt and tights and put the pearls on, and I spent the whole time like not dropping any of my T's and making sure I was very articulate, exhausting by the end of it. Luckily I still got the job, but do you know what I found out a year later? I very nearly didn't get the job because I was so polished. So for me, like, when I found out, obviously it was funny at the time, but it kind of blew me sideways and like made me really realize the lesson about bringing your genuine self to the table with what you do, not just outside of work, but in your professional career as well. And all of that energy that we can waste on worrying what people think, or maybe I shouldn't say something, all of that. I mean, I still have it, because I think that's quite natural, but it's freed up a lot of my my creativity and work, and actually being able to speak up and better serve the communities that we work with in White City.
That's wonderful. And I love the way you relate to all the different people that you work with. And since you've been with us, Imperial has been developing a world-class campus in White City. There wasn't much there when you started. And we have the top facilities for molecular science and engineering. We have our biomedical engineering hub, the urine hub. We've invested in incubators for entrepreneurs to start their companies. We now have scale space for them to grow their companies, hack spaces where our academics and community members can test out ideas. But as we develop these ideas, we realized that we want to make a difference to our community. And Maggie had this marvelous vision for what are now called the invention rooms. And she came up with that name for this wonderful maker space. And that's aimed at primarily at school-age members of our community, but it's used by a number of different groups. And I wonder if you could start out, Priya, with a little description of the White City community, the challenges they face, and how we're working with them.
Sure, absolutely. So I would say that the White City community is wonderfully diverse. It's extremely complex, as many inner London areas are. And I think what we've been doing over the last 5 years is really trying to understand the community infrastructure that exists in the area, trying to understand what are the priorities of our residents, and also what do they feel are some of the challenges, and what do they feel are the solutions. I think in terms of challenges, I think like with many inner London areas, there's a number of issues like food poverty, health inequality, youth crime, which I think reflects inequality in the UK more broadly. But we've all seen it's been massively exacerbated by COVID. And I think one of those examples that I just wanted to touch on was around digital exclusion. So we have thousands of children in the area, and actually there's hundreds of thousands of people across the UK who don't have access to reliable internet or the hardware that they need to access it. And, you know, just off the thinking about some of the parents that I've dealt with in White City, you know, they've shared stories where you've got a mum who has 3 children and 1 laptop. So she's had to schedule homeschooling sessions in from 9 in the morning till 11 o'clock at night, or another parent who doesn't have access to the internet in the house, so uses data from their phone. And when that data runs out for the month. So, you know, there's some really kind of heartbreaking stories. And what we do know is that children that are living near the poverty line are likely to experience academic disadvantage compared to their wealthier peers. So we know this. But can you imagine like the damage that's taken place since lockdown, and the impact that this has had on young people, but in such an important developmental period of time for them? And just quickly to add, it's not just young people. So it's also we have many of our neighbours, our older residents, who have been affected by lockdown, and also the digitisation of services. So you'll see that there's, you know, visiting your doctor online, banking online. So we've seen the effect that it can have on our older residents as well. And that we can touch a little bit later on some of the programmes. But I think for us, it's been working with community partners and residents to look at ways that we can support and tackle and address some of these issues.
That's really, really interesting and important for us to remember how different the perspective is. We think, oh, look, now everything's accessible, but it really there really are some huge hurdles. And but you have done so much in White City and beyond, and I really want to you know, thank you for how Imperial is truly present for the community. From the invention rooms to work with primary school teachers, a homework club, online maths for A levels, and now we're heading towards a math school. I wanted maybe both of you to talk a little bit about the university's role in this civic engagement, and then I might go to a couple of questions from our audience.
Shall I kick off, Priya? So I think, Alice, this is a really, really interesting question, and it's a really, really important time for us to get it right. And I think about this a lot, and I try to think about it in a balanced way, because we are one university, and we have to keep that in perspective. So I think there are things that we need to do, which for me, a complete no-brainer. So proper communication about the science that we do and the value that it has is absolutely essential. And if any young scientist cannot properly communicate the science that they're trying to do, then I think there's a problem. And indeed, we've tried to address this by putting in a lot of training programs, right from undergraduate students right through to the most senior professors. So I think that at one end is, you know, complete no-brainer. We cannot be a university and get away with not communicating properly. And I think it's even more important when you think that some of the research that we do aims to address climate change, it aims to address pollution, and those things require change, behavioural change. And if we don't communicate properly around those, we're not going to see the effects, the outcomes that we want. And I think the Grantham, for instance, is brilliant in this sphere in communicating what they do and what is actually needed. I also think that we do have a role in addressing social inequalities, of which there are many, and Priya has just touched on those. And part of that is our support for pre-university education and skills training, and that you've alluded to that in some of the things that you've said. So, you know, trying to address at a local level the whole levelling up agenda. And by the way, the levelling up agenda, I think, has to apply to people, not regions. It's people that need to be levelled up, not regions that need to be levelled up. And of course, as Priya's been outlining, it's especially bad now post-COVID. But I also recognise that we can't change the world, and our resources, like everybody's, are limited. So I think what we can do is what we're doing at White City, working closely with our community, supporting them and the most vulnerable people within that community. And I think we need to join up with other partners beyond that local community if we want our impact to go wider and broader. And that is something, you know, that we're really thinking a lot about at the moment. Where are the partners? Are they other universities, schools, and so on, beyond London, where we can build on the impact by getting more people involved?
There's a very relevant question in the chat. I'll just mention that, isn't it a pity that most of these ventures are limited to certain areas of London, which I think you're getting at, the opportunity perhaps to use what you've learned in White City as a model for others, and to help others do similar things or to have partnerships.
We'd love to do that. And actually, we've been in discussion with some universities, and the maths school that you mentioned actually has opened up a network of universities who are also partnering on maths schools. And that network, it's actually a joy to see, because one of the few things that I think I've experienced in my life where universities are not trying to compete with each other. We're really trying to work together to get more than the sum of the individual parts. So I think that maths school network could be a really interesting platform for us in the future to develop some of our ideas outside of London.
Priya, maybe you'd like to add to this.
Yeah, I just kind of think at a localized level, one of the things that we've sort of seen with the time that we've spent in White City is that you have, and I'm sure this happens across the board, so you have lots of people doing amazing work, but often in silos. So you'll have initiatives where maybe it's taking place in one community centre, and then it might be taking place, 10 minutes away somewhere else. And I think one of the benefits that we bring, being an institution and an anchor institution that's in the area now and will be for the next X hundred years or so, is that we have this power to bring together and convene different partners. So we spend time talking to different people and connecting, and that's pretty much the bread and butter of what we do. So I feel like, for the vision for our role is to continue to be leveraging our networks, leveraging our expertise, not necessarily delivering everything, and working with community partners to support them to deliver their own activities in their own ways.
Thank you. And you do work really well with such a broad group of interesting community partners. I think I'll take a question from the chat and add a bit to it. A comment actually from Alethea Cope. Great to hear that authentic self is the best way of communication across a multidisciplinary team. You work with all different kinds of groups, Priya, and you're now yourself. You're not trying to be anybody else. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, do you know what? Absolutely. I'm still working on it. I'm not quite there yet. But do you know what's so interesting? So Maggie and I look at both of us. So we come from very different walks of life. We have very different career paths, but we have so much in common when it comes to our work in White City. And that again is like another lesson that for me that I've learned is that not to be intimidated by, or to put yourself down because you feel like you don't have the knowledge or the expertise. But actually, no matter who you meet and no matter what level they are at, when you can find your connecting values, you can really have a very strong connection, like I think we do in the work that we undertake in White City.
And a related question for Maggie. The first question we had was, do you have any advice for young people interested in science today?
Yes, that's always a tough one. And I'd like to point out that I'm really not intimidating at all.
I was talking about me, Maggie.
And I don't come from a scientific background, but anyway, we can explore that more if we want to. So advice to a young scientist, I think, it's challenging, actually, I feel at the moment. There are all sorts of things that have come together as in a perfect storm that make what we do, whether it's science or other things, difficult. So I think my advice to a young scientist is to think really carefully about what it is you want to do, because steps from school upwards, they're major commitments. Your university degree, maybe a PhD, and so on. These are big commitments, and you have to really have thought about those before you take them up. But when you do, if you decide, yes, I'm going to go down that route, then always take the opportunity. And this is something I've had in my career, a series of wonderful male mentors, actually. And that was one of the things that I was told very, very early on, actually, from my professor in Bristol, who continued to give me references right through to the job that I have now at Imperial College. Very stoic he was. But he said to me, take the opportunity. And I think too often, actually, and often more women, young women than the guys, we think, oh, that we can't do that. That, there's a list of qualities that you have to have. And we look down the list and we find the thing that we don't have amongst all of the things that we do have and say, we can't do that job. And actually, the guys don't, in general, do that. They're much more likely just to try things out. And I think I would encourage, whether the person that's speaking to us is a young male or a young female scientist, then take the opportunity. If it's given to you, take the opportunity. You will always learn from a new opportunity, and grab it with both hands and give it your best shot.
Thank you. I think I'll actually lead that one into an anonymous question on what are the top tips for aligning innovation to policy, because I'd like to talk a little bit about innovation at White City. We have our incubator. There are some startup companies coming out of our postgraduate research and all kinds of interesting new ideas being pursued. We have scale space to help scale those up. But we also have the invention rooms and we have hack spaces. And I think some of the most interesting innovations are coming from our own community members, and that opportunity to allow people to take risks, as you say, in career decisions, taking risks, but also as entrepreneurs to try something out, is sort of the community spirit we're building at White City. And I don't know, Maggie, if you want to briefly tell the wonderful story of the buggy, the baby buggy, but it's, the invention rooms to me are so inspiring. The children come in who are not very excited about school, not very excited about what their future is. They have an idea, they make something, and it transforms their outlook. And now they are able to make some of those decisions. So help us also think about innovation across the community. And I know you and Priya both see a lot of innovative people really wanting to solve real world problems that we might not think about sitting in our labs and offices.
Yes, and I think the baby buggy is a great example of that. And all of this goes to the importance of diversity in our communities of scientists, I think. So the story of Ramona, the baby buggy, is that Ramona was a local resident who's visually impaired. And she figured that she had an idea, and she figured that our students, being brilliant as they are, would be able to help her with putting her idea into practice. And her idea was to put sensors around a pushchair so that when she was pushing the pushchair, she would know if a road was coming up or there was something obstructing her way. And we paired her up with a student, an engineering student, and they developed a fantastic prototype baby buggy, which allowed Ramona to do precisely what she wanted to do, which was to walk around the streets with her nieces and nephews in the pushchair. And as you said, Alice, we wouldn't have had that idea necessarily because it wasn't a problem for us. So putting together people with ideas from diverse backgrounds with some of our engineers leads to amazing innovation. And I think the link to policy is a really interesting one. I actually think that the link between science, whether it's innovation or whatever, and policy is kind of broken at the moment. And largely, I'm going to stick my neck out here, I think that's due to the people making the policy not being scientists themselves. And somehow, and I asked my son this actually, I asked him, I said, why wouldn't you want to be a politician? Oh, I can't be bothered with that. I went, but what about making policy? Oh, I can't be bothered with that. Now he's a scientist actually. And for him, this policy development is not something he feels is of interest to him. But actually, I think that could have been different if we'd educated him about the importance of implementing science through policy. So I do think that one of the things we could do as a university is actually try to illustrate to our young scientists and engineers and medics the importance of that step into policy.
Yes, indeed. And I will make a pitch for the forum, which is a new gathering point to bring these scientists together with policymakers and have that dialogue and learn how to improve that communication. Priya, do you want to comment on that, policies and?
Yeah, I would just add that again, this is where the role of community engagement is really important, because in order for you to find the people who have the ideas, you need to be present within the communities. And that's why we spent this time with our coffee budget to just be in community spaces. Because I think what can happen when you have a beautiful campus is there can be a natural desire to want to share that with people and get them to come in. But actually, one of the principles of community engagement is about meeting people where they're at. So in order for us to have met Ramona, we were in the spaces that she was in. So that is a big part of our engagement, which we're looking to, once all the lockdowns lift, start doing, because we haven't been able to do that face-to-face work over the last year.
Yes, and you'll be pleased that someone in the chat has said the work you guys do is amazing. So thank you. As a postgrad student who just started Imperial and not knowing London, wondering how to get involved. So we will definitely ask how, and I think of many student-led things, what the tech meets people where they are. I don't know if you want to talk about that, Priya.
Yeah, absolutely. So what the tech is a really nice example of collaboration from a community idea and supported by an Imperial department run by our students. So when we first started, we went to visit a community centre and there was a wall full of donated computers. And then the lady that ran the centre was like, we got these, but we don't know how to use them. Can you help? At the same time, our awesome business students had got in touch and said, look, we hear that there's this work going on in White City. What can we do? How can we help? So that was really nice, because it wasn't, this is what we want to do. They were listening. So we brought the two together, and actually they co-produced what the tech. So from the name to who, to the sessions, to the times. So this session runs in 2 community venues. So it takes place in one of the, in the Edward Woods estate. which is in Shepherd's Bush, and also at the Invention Rooms. And it's super simple. So it's our students and staff come along, there's tea, coffee and cake, and older residents bring their gadgets and their laptops, and we sit with them side by side and help them work through their technology. And we've had some really lovely stories of residents who can now Skype family abroad and keep in touch. And it's always been a project that everyone loves because it's so heartwarming, but actually it was one of our core projects that supported the lockdown response. So the minute lockdown hit, obviously we couldn't run these sessions anymore. So we flipped the service to a phone tech support scheme. So the idea being that our residents from across London, not just Hammersmith and Fulham and in our neighbourhood, were allocated with a phone tech support buddy. So they have 2 weekly phone calls a week where they can work through how to get online, tackle problems. So it's something that we're going to continue even when the lockdown lifts, because we know that there are accessibility issues for older people. But in the future, we'd love to run multiple hubs in the area.
That's marvelous. That's a great example, and you have coped extremely well given the circumstances when you're a real hands-on community engagement person. I'm going to roll together a couple of points and questions. Stuart says he's always been impressed by Imperial's commitment to the local society, but this needs surely real political commitment, which presently seems missing. How can this be changed? And Althea Cope says, what key take-home messages can we learn from the rapid development and deployment of vaccines for COVID to ensure that as a society, we continue to partner and collaborate for addressing other health challenges globally? I think clearly there's that aspect of both political commitment and community engagement. And I wonder if you have some thoughts on where we can go to amplify what you're doing.
It's a great question. You know, if I knew how to get the political ear, I would do so. I mean, yeah, I agree. Stuart, was it? We absolutely need to get the political ear. These are problems that go way beyond what any university can solve for our society. You know, we're talking societal divide here, and all we can do is continue to send the message. And Alice mentioned the forum, and we have an international version of that as well, where we try to engage politicians and others. Yeah, I wish I knew the answer to that, and I'm not sure it'll be solved in my lifetime.
Meg, yeah, if I may, I would say that one thing you've done in White City and this engagement, certainly the local community and Hammersmith and Fulham are very excited about what you're doing, and very supportive and interested. But you've also, I think, opened people's eyes to the talent and the capabilities and the sheer, creativity and ideas in the community. And I think, if anything, we can advocate for thinking about ways to engender that type of opportunity for people, rather than trying to sit in separate rooms somewhere and decide what's good for them. And so I think that there's perhaps a little bit of room for some political persuasion, not just asking for help, but helping show government how some of these things could make a bigger difference.
Yeah, and I think it's always going to be a kind of multi-agency approach that's needed, because there are some real problems in the community that we can't tackle. We simply can't tackle as a university, and we've done our best to bring together partners. And maybe the moment now, I mean, certainly when we started, it was that thinking, that multi-agency approach to get something really significant done that really excited me. And we haven't, we've achieved that to an extent, but not as broadly as it needs to be achieved. And so I think we should go back, Alice, to thinking about this idea about our convening power and how we can bring in some of these multifarious groups together to solve some of these problems. And that will obviously include local government. I'd like it to include influencing government as well. But
yes. Well, I think it can. Actually, an anonymous post said it better than I did. Priya's point about meeting people where they are probably applies for policymakers too, as many of them, as Maggie says, don't have a science background and can be either intimidated or dismissive. Hopefully at Imperial, we can be part of changing that gap. And Priya, you really are meeting people where they are. And, you know, you also were seconded to Hammersmith and Fulham. I mean, all politics is local and you've started locally. So help us, you know, think your perspective on the government relations.
Yeah, so I mean, I completely agree with Maggie. They're huge societal issues that are entrenched and have been so for many years. But I feel like we do have a role to play where it comes to supporting community voices. So we might not be able to directly influence and lobby politicians, which we may be able to, but what we can do through our programs is create spaces where we can work with residents to help them feel confident in voicing their experiences and thoughts to people and in the right platform. So one of the programs that we run in White City, which again is another resident-led program, is Agents of Change. And what we do is we bring together 200 plus women who live in White City who are driving social change. We come together and we network, we share contacts, we share advice, and we bring in influential people to be part of that network. So people who have the social power to make change, but also we run a leadership program. So each year for 15 of those women, we look at how, these are awesome women who know exactly what they need to do, but we pull in our expertise and our resources to say, okay, so here's the impact you're making. What can we help you with to take it to the next step? So we can train on storytelling, we can train on influencing, making a case, and then introducing them to the people in the local council who also then can play their part in having those broader discussions.
And I think if I can just add to that, maybe if it's okay, Alice, I think part of this programme is what will go to building resilience within the community. And, one of the big issues for us, I think, is sustainability of all of these programmes. But if we can build in the community the skills required to run with some of these programmes or develop new programmes, then we build a resilience into the community. And I think that's going to be really very important in the long term. And Priya and I have discussed that dimension of resilience a lot, actually. And I have to say that actually one of the wonderful women on this Agents of Change programme reduced me to tears, not because she said anything horrible to me, but because she came up to me and said, "You've changed my life." And I have to say, that's pretty special.
That's marvelous. And let's take Dominic Klein's challenge question, which is a challenge. Are there any areas of local national policy that universities such as Imperial are particularly well placed to support? And I think, you captured it well, perhaps, Maggie, in saying the leveling up agenda should be about people, not about places necessarily. They're people in the communities. And I think we should think about your empowering women through Agents of Change is just a fabulous example. A couple of questions about the pandemic and the vaccine. I wanted to shift a little bit for our last few minutes because, as you know, in a couple of weeks, we're breaking ground for our new School of Public Health in White City. And that's such an additional fantastic opportunity. It's going to bring our world-leading public health school and academics and students right into the heart of White City. And the first pillar of our School of Public Health is the Mohn Center for Children's Health and Well-Being. And so that focus on children and the hope for the future and their health is so exciting and so important. And we desperately need to help people with both physical and mental health and stop the silos of those. And we're very much engaged in that in the Mohn Center. We're also taking the many things we learn around the world, because our School of Public Health, of course, works all over the world, and bringing those ideas into White City, and what we will learn in White City, taking those ideas out to the world. We know we need to better integrate medical and social care. We have one of the largest, I think, centers for training general practitioners. And the neighborhood GP clinic is an important part of the community and a model for medical care. So I just wanted to get your thoughts. We're running slightly short on last 10 minutes. How do you see this role expanding? There's a question in the chat about, are we participating in Rob Klaver's vaccine hubs that have been working out how to increase uptake for communities such as these people? That all has to do with building trust. Priya, you must be one of the most trusted faces in White City. Let's talk a little bit about that opportunity in health.
Should I touch on the question around the vaccination hubs? Maybe I can pick up on that. So yes, we are involved, and we know, for example, if we look at data with White City, that there is a low uptake amongst certain ethnic groups. So what we've been doing is we've been working with researchers and clinicians at the college who are from different ethnic backgrounds to go into the community, unfortunately virtually, which we know we have barriers to, but to answer people's questions directly and build that trust. But again, it's a cross partnership piece of work. So we're working with the NHS, we're working with the council to bring have these discussions and conversations. I think there's an interesting piece. So when we listen to residents, why they're reluctant, I think there's a historic piece of work, a historic issue that we as large organisations need to explore through our work around trust building and medicine. But I think what's been wonderful about the partnership is that we're learning things, like Maggie said right at the beginning. We would never know about this lack of trust in the work that I do, only until we started having these conversations. So moving forward now, because I think unfortunately COVID is going to be with us for a long time, how can we take these learnings and how can we work with partners on the ground to help with the messaging?
That's great, and I think that leads into, with the School of Public Health located there, and more engagement with the community through the GP clinic, through the School of Public Health. I hope we can help break those barriers and build that trust. I know, Maggie, you've thought a lot about this, also for the future of the invention rooms and the other activities. What are you seeing in the future, and how Imperial's role in the community will be expanding?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think, the healthcare inequalities are deep and serious in White City. It's a kind of microcosm of what's happening elsewhere in the country, but it's the life expectancy varies by about a decade between South Kensington, leafy green suburbs, and White City. And that these days is just unacceptable. And we have been working with GPs in the area, and Rob actually is doing a fantastic job in trying to bring people together to bear on these sorts of problems. So I do think with the School of Public Health, with the medical faculty obviously being largely embedded over at White City, there's huge opportunity to do more. And actually, I want to give a shout out for Professor Helen Ward, in terms of her working with patient groups to try and get over some of these barriers and trying to make the patient experience one that people are not frightened of. And I think the stuff she's doing is just absolutely fantastic. And it's great that it's part of what we're doing as a university out there. Yes,
and I would expand on that and say our Masters of Public Health is a global master's taught online to people all over the world who need to learn some of the elements of public health and while they're still in their jobs, while they're in their communities. And we're making more and more available to our own community. They took it upon themselves, Helen and the Jameel Institute, to develop a Coursera course on COVID, on coronavirus, as we learn together as a world and as a community of scientists learn more and more about the virus. It was a really important way to get the fresh information out there to the public. And I think one can only build trust by really having those honest and open conversations. And as Priya said, listening to people and finding out what their fears are. because they may be looking at it from a very different light than we are, and we may not think about how scary it sounds to them. So any additional thoughts? I guess I'd like to ask, we have many wonderful supporters on this at this event, and you know, if you could do more, what would you do? What are some of your visions and ideas for the future? Maybe Priya?
Lots. So I think the thing with our community engagement program is it's continuously rolling, and it's continuously developing and responding to needs and ideas. What I would say is that we've seeded a lot of fantastic community initiatives, resident-led, that we've got a proven track record that it works. And what I would love to see sort of moving forward is the investment and the ability to really develop them further and grow. Feedback that I've had from residents is that, particularly in an area like White City, which is undergoing quite significant regeneration, means that projects come and go quite frequently. So residents are, you know, they find something, they get involved, and it disappears. And it's that, again, part of that, the trust and that building momentum. So for me, it's about being able to sustainably deliver some of our programs and develop them further as our communities develop.
And maybe I can just add, I think that sustainability is the thing that keeps me up at night, actually. How are we going to keep all of this incredible stuff that is so much appreciated and so undoubtedly valuable to the community? How are we going to maintain that in the long term? So we do have an amazing program of different activities, and we're always developing more. For instance, at the moment, we're developing a real youth-based program where we're taking those teenagers that you know, perhaps have a few problems and are finding themselves actually in their lives, and trying to support their development through doing kind of exciting things, all of which have a science base, but allow them to acquire other skills. So there are always new programs, but as I think, you know, Priya sort of alluded to, it's that sustainability that really kind of worries me. I'd also, you know, Alice, my vision is to have in maker spaces, child-led maker spaces across the country. At the moment, we get students for that program between the ages of 14 and 18 from right across London. I mean, we had one young man who came from Lewisham to come to our programs. The program is run as an after school and Saturday club, but he came from Lewisham. Now that's a big commute. So there's a need out there. This is our maker programs are really fulfilling a real need out there, and to be able to seed a network of those, maybe alongside our maths schools network, would just be incredible.
Well, thank you for all that you're doing, and I think it's been really inspiring to hear both of your stories about how you've come to do what you're doing now, and what your visions and exciting ideas are for the future. And I know that many people in our community are hugely appreciative. And I think one real take-home message for me is it's about listening to the community and engaging with them where they are and talking to them, and developing the ways that we can share the excitement of science, the excitement of invention and innovation in technology and medicine with people who wouldn't normally be so engaged and excited about that. So bravo to you, and thank you. And I want to thank everyone for joining us. We look forward to these. I hope you'll keep in touch. We will send you notices of our current and future women luminaries series. And let's just thank Maggie and Priya very much.
Well, and Alice, I'd just like to add my thanks to you for your personal support that you've given to everything that we do out at White City. Without that, we would have not been able to achieve anything. So thank you.